The knowledge we acquire that enables man to live, that is, the knowledge above the perceptual level, comes from integrations we choose to make. That is, from identifying similarities among things and mentally uniting them. We integrate our percepts into concepts, which we use to identify truths. We integrate those truths into wider truths, which we then integrate into principles and ever wider principles. That is the logical process by which human beings grasp and master reality. Package deals sabotage this process. Whenever you accept a package deal, you are undermining your ability to think logically about whatever the package deal pertains to. What is a package deal? Package deal is an attack on integration. It is an attempt to integrate things which are not similar, an attempt to blur the differences between things and pretend that they are alike. When I spoke on this subject in the past, and some of you may have heard that, I focused on that aspect of package deals. That is, on the fact that they try to integrate the unintegratable. Today I want to focus more on the destructiveness of package deals. The right way to understand package deals is not just that they are false or invalid integrations, but that they destroy valid integrations, the valid integrations that you've already made. They destroy legitimate knowledge that you have acquired. They do not just say that A is similar to B when it isn't. They say, in effect, A, there is no A, it's B. Consider the term simplistic. Simplistic. Perhaps some of you use it, but it's important to realize that it's a package deal. We have the legitimate concept simple or simplified, and we have the legitimate concept oversimplified. What does simplistic do? Well, at first it may seem to be just a synonym for oversimplified, but is it? We always have to look at how the word is being used. What does it actually refer to? What is it that is being labeled simplistic? So if you say, for instance, that the single fundamental explanation for the Renaissance was a rebirth of the recognition of the power of reason, you will be scorned. You will be told you're being simplistic. You will be accused of ignoring the many other factors explaining the Renaissance, such as, well, the interest in art, the desire for geographic exploration, the growth of science, the declining influence of religion, the invention of the printing press, etc. You will be told that you are blind to the complexities of reality which do not have just one answer. Now, normally, when we say that something is oversimplified, we mean that there are many factors involved and that they are being ignored if you name only one. For example, Trump lost the election in 2020 because he was seen as boorish and uncouth. Now, there were a number of factors underlying his loss, and they are not reducible to just one. The attempt to do so is an oversimplification, which means that the goal of simplifying something is good, but that you can go wrong. Here, however, in explaining the Renaissance, you are not going wrong. You are not ignoring anything. You are reducing a number of factors to just one broad, all-encompassing factor. You're saying that the interest in art and in science and in exploration, all of that is a manifestation of the embrace of reason. You're saying that the many are really one, that the many narrower factors are part of one wide fundamental principle that explains them all. The accusation of being simplistic means that the complex cannot be reduced to the simple. It means that concretes cannot be subsumed by a broad principle, and that the attempt to simplify something complex is inherently flawed. It means, in effect, that to simplify is to oversimplify. That is what's being packaged together. And thus, when we confront certain complexities, particularly in the humanities, which need to be made simple, we lose the concept of simple. There is no such thing as the reduction of the complex to the simple, the package dealer declares. There is only the simplistic attempt to do so. A is really B. The simple is really the simplistic. Now, what I've just described is a package deal that takes the form of an anti-concept. An anti-concept is a pseudo-concept. It's a term that is not usable as a valid concept, but instead eliminates and replaces some valid concept, as simplistic does. But package deals can be something other than a single word or concept. A package deal can be an overall argument or an interpretation of some event whereby two incongruous things are packaged together. Take, for example, the story of Robin Hood. He was supposed to have lived in England in late medieval times. The people then were oppressed by their feudal lords who grew rich by stealing from the helpless peasants. Robin Hood, according to the legend, regularly attacked the thieving authorities and gave their money back to the peasants. And so he's regarded as someone to be admired, and rightly so. But people, unfortunately, don't explicitly name the reason for their admiration. So along come the package dealers who say that the essential fact about Robin Hood was that he took from the rich and gave to the poor. They say that his virtue was charity, not justice. That is, they package Robin Hood together with any welfare state bureaucrat charged with the redistribution of wealth. So the actual reason that people admire Robin Hood, the fact that he restored stolen goods to their owners, is erased. It's gone. What really happened, the package dealers assert, was the transfer of goods from rich to poor. All forms of package dealing replace a valid integration with an invalid one. The valid concept simple is replaced by the invalid complex concept simplistic. The valid interpretation of Robin Hood as returning stolen goods is replaced by the invalid interpretation of Robin Hood as redistributing wealth from the haves to the have-nots. Now, let me remind you here about the difference between a word and a concept. You can have the same word representing two or more very different concepts. The word table stands for an object you put things on, and it stands for the concept of postponing or delaying something. The word beef stands for a piece of meat or for a complaint. Same word, different concepts. So keep that in mind. With anti-concepts also, a word can stand for just the anti-concept, like simplistic, or the word can stand for both a legitimate concept and an anti-concept. For example, the word democracy. There, the valid meaning of that term is a political system based on unlimited majority rule. Obviously, that's a system which is incompatible with the principle of individual rights. But the term democracy has become a package deal, an anti-concept. It is now a term that is vaguely defined as a system under which citizens govern themselves by electing their government representatives. The term is used to refer to the system on which America is based, which is actually what? A constitutional republic. That is, a system that does have voting, but one in which the more important fact is that individual rights may not be infringed. But that, of course, is never named. Instead, the package dealers point to America and say, well, since the people here are free to vote, this is the system we call democracy. The concept of a constitutional republic, along with the valid concept of democracy, is thus erased to be replaced by this fuzzy term democracy, which prevents most people from understanding what freedom actually depends on and what makes or what made America exceptional. So A is really B. America, founded on the principle of inalienable rights, is really a system that rests on the population being allowed to vote. All this is a preface so that you get the basic idea of a package deal. What we will look at today is, first, the far-reaching destructiveness, the cognitive destructiveness of package deals. Second, we will look at two different kinds of package deals. And third, we will look at how to recognize package deals, particularly the more devious ones. So, first point. Package deals are destructive because they make logical thinking impossible. That is, to the extent that you accept a package deal, it undercuts your thinking on that subject. It makes the illogical seem plausible. That's why it's such a useful weapon. To get an idea of the far-reaching consequences of a package deal, let's look at one of today's foremost threats to individual rights: censorship. Now, the concept censorship is, or should be, very straightforwardly defined. Its definition is an act of government that forbids someone from expressing his ideas. It is a means by which freedom of speech is violated by law. Now, if you wanted to undermine that freedom, you would concoct a different meaning for the term censorship. You would declare, let's say, that censorship means something like keeping anyone from conveying his views. You might adopt the definition offered by the American Civil Liberties Union, which is, quote, censorship, the suppression of words, images, or ideas that are offensive, happens whenever some people succeed in imposing their personal, political, or moral values on others, close quote. Censorship is whenever some people succeed in imposing their personal, political, or moral values on others. According to this definition, censorship does not have to involve government at all. It does not have to involve force. If you have a platform, like Facebook's, for example, and you refuse to accept certain posts because they conflict with your political or moral beliefs, you become guilty of censorship, which means that the government must then compel you to include those posts in order to safeguard the rights of the people you are excluding. And indeed, this is exactly what is happening to Facebook and other platforms. Why is it allowed to happen? Because of the package deal that the term censorship has developed into. If censorship is defined as, quote, imposing your moral or political values on others, if censorship consists in refusing to provide someone with a microphone, an auditorium, an op-ed column, or an online platform that you have created, then the actual concept of censorship has been destroyed. And so has the concept of free speech. In reality, when Facebook decides not to accept a certain post, just as when the New York Times decides not to accept a certain op-ed, it is exercising its freedom of speech. It is exercising its right to communicate through its property, its ideas, and not ideas it deems unacceptable, for whatever reason. Yet such decisions are now regarded as censorship. On a proper view, the right to speak must obviously entail the right not to speak. And when the government forces Facebook to publish something it does not want to, that is the equivalent of censorship. The government is coercing the company into conveying ideas which it does not want to be associated with. Yet this is now regarded as defending free speech, as defending the alleged right of an excluded party to compel Facebook to publish his message. In a complete perversion of language, the freedom to speak, including the freedom not to speak, becomes the sin of censorship. And to magnify this intellectual confusion, when students today stage demonstrations by forcibly occupying campus buildings and setting up structures that obstruct college activities, they are said to be exercising their right to free speech. And when the police try to stop them, we are told that the students are being censored. The initiation of force is deemed a right. The retaliatory use of force is deemed censorship. Now, I spoke at OCON last year, which some of you may have heard, about how the increasing assaults on freedom of speech are made possible by the refusal to acknowledge the distinction between words and actions. That refusal is facilitated by this package deal of censorship. If, as per the ACLU definition, no actual force is required for censorship to occur, then offensive speech can well be considered an act of censorship. After all, if your refusal to publicize my opinion is censorship, then what about your active disagreement with my opinion? Doesn't that too make it harder for me to have my viewpoint heard? Isn't that also censorship? So just think about this. Free speech is censorship, and censorship is free speech. That's how, by the insidious technique of package dealing, your right to express your ideas is vanishing. Now let's look at another major threat to individual rights, the diversity campaign. This is how egalitarianism is injected into the culture. It is how objective standards for judging people are repudiated. We need diversity, we're told. We need to do away with standards based on individual merit and instead strive to achieve racial and sexual diversity. Is the term diversity a package deal? Well, at first glance, it seems to be a legitimate concept. It seems to have a valid referent in reality. Diversity means a variety of elements or characteristics. Yes, the advocates of diversity are wrong in believing that diversity is inherently good, but why should it be considered a package deal? It does not seem similar to the other package deals we've been discussing. So here we do indeed have a new type of package deal. And this is now point 2. This new type of package deal is highly prevalent and just as destructive. While all package deals blur differences, this type blurs a certain kind of difference. It blurs subdivisions. It blurs the difference between conceptual subcategories. It blurs the difference between conceptual subcategories. What do I mean by that? Let's take a few minutes to examine this kind of package deal, and then we'll get back to the specific question about diversity. Let's say you live in a neighborhood where several people own pit bulls, and where each of those pit bulls has recently attacked and severely harmed the residents. And let's say further that you despise dogs and you want to eliminate all of them from your community. So you start distributing leaflets that announce, "Neighborhood dogs are attacking residents." You launch a campaign to warn people to beware of all dogs. You organize a petition to get the local council to impound all dogs in the town is too dangerous. Now, clearly, you're doing something wrong, something devious. What? You are trying to put over a package deal. You are trying to obscure the difference between the guilty pit bulls on the one hand and the innocent poodles, Yorkies, Dachshunds on the other hand. You're trying to package them all together as dogs when obviously here you must differentiate one subdivision of dogs from the others. Now you may think this is a contrived example, one that couldn't occur in real life, yet it happens all the time with disastrous consequences. You've probably heard about the opioid epidemic we're suffering from. Tens of thousands of people are dying annually and more each year because they are addicted to opioids and are overdosing on them. As a result, the government has cracked down on doctors, restricting the number of opioid prescriptions they are allowed to write for their patients. The interesting point about this development is that there is no opioid epidemic. Opioids are a broad group of drugs that relieve pain as well as produce a state of euphoria. The category of opioids includes prescription medicines such as Vicodin or OxyContin, and illegal drugs such as heroin and fentanyl. Both the legal and illegal drugs are subdivisions of opioids. But the growing number of deaths from drug overdoses is in fact almost entirely attributable to the street drugs, mainly fentanyl. Now, leave aside the political question of whether there should be any legal difference between one drug and another. And clearly, though, there is a medical difference between, say, Vicodin and fentanyl, between drugs obtained at a pharmacy versus drugs obtained through shady deals on street corners. And if the growing number of overdose deaths is overwhelmingly from the latter, from the street drugs, the so-called opioid epidemic should be seen as a fentanyl epidemic. Instead, we have this package deal combining prescription medicines with illegal drugs, a package deal that obfuscates the difference between one subdivision of opioids and another. Thus, largely because of hostility toward big pharmaceutical companies, the fentanyl problem is mislabeled as an opioid problem. And the tragic result is that countless patients who desperately need relief from pain, are forced to suffer needlessly because their doctors are restricted in their freedom to write prescriptions for pain medicine. Or consider the package deal that equates political power with economic power. or the power of force with the power of persuasion. The package dealer says that since the government's power is dangerous, so is the businessman's power, and both must therefore be legally constrained. Here, too, the duplicity lies in the refusal to recognize different subdivisions of a broader category. Both subdivisions of power, political power and economic power, are valid terms, but they must be distinguished when it comes to evaluating them. And when that differentiation is obscured, a deadly package deal comes into being with the claim that power as such is dangerous. As a quick aside, let me note that this is the same tactic used by Friedrich Hayek in his ill-conceived defense of capitalism. A government-planned economy doesn't work, he said. Why? Because it rests on a misguided belief in, a fatal conceit about, the power of reason. A political or ethical system, he said, cannot be created by deliberate, rational design. Instead, it must emerge, quote, spontaneously through social tradition. This makes a package deal out of planning. The actual problem with government planning is not the planning, but the government planning. Private individuals can certainly create political and ethical systems by deliberate design. That's the only way they can be created. But Hayek smears planning as such, or at least wide-ranging planning. For him, there is only a false alternative. Either the principles guiding an economy are set by government fiat, or they arise spontaneously by mindless consensus. Let's look at one final example of a hot cultural topic: discrimination. Is that a package deal? Well, we know that racial discrimination is bad. Judging people by their race is wrong because virtually every area of human life has no objective difference between one race and another. But the package dealer takes the next subtle step and says, in effect, that discrimination as such is wrong, that any discrimination is unjustified discrimination. The evil of racial discrimination, he says, is not the racism, but the discrimination. So if you discriminate between men and women, or between young and old, or between the able and the incompetent, even when such discrimination is warranted, you are committing the same injustice as the racial discriminator. It's all one blurry package deal. And because this package deal is widely accepted, a vast number of legitimate discriminations, of rational, life-enhancing discriminations, are smeared as something evil. And this leads to the coining of a whole bunch of new anti-discrimination words such as sexism, ageism, ableism, speciesism, all of which are disastrous package deals. I don't have time to go into that. If you're interested, ask me in the question period. Now we can come back to diversity. Diversity is a term with a positive connotation, the connotation that diversity is something good. It starts with the correct observation that if you hire, let's say, an all-white labor force because you refuse to employ blacks, that is bad. Whereas, if you don't reject blacks and are willing to have a racially diverse labor force, that is good. From this, the package dealer concludes that racial diversity as such is a proper goal. But this conclusion blurs the obvious difference between, on the one hand, a diversity of races resulting from colorblindness, i.e. from ignoring race in the hiring decision, and on the other hand, a diversity of races resulting from emphasizing religion in the emphasizing race in the hiring decision. It blurs the difference between opposing racism and adopting racism. And here too, the demand extends beyond just race to gender, to ability, etc. The package deal of discrimination is the counterpart of the package deal of diversity. Both are implementations of egalitarianism. One says don't exclude anyone just because of differences. The other says include everyone despite differences. Both demand that we ignore differences because discrimination as such is bad and diversity as such is good. I think you can see at this point how package deals make the illogical seem plausible, how they get people to believe that A is really B. They do so primarily through focusing on non-essentials. You can see how a package deal's target is vaguely redefined or reinterpreted by means of a non-essential characteristic. A package deal doesn't openly declare that, say, a constitutional republic where rights are inalienable is actually a democracy where rights can be voted away by the majority. Instead, everything is done by subterfuge. The package dealer points to America's system, does not name it as a constitutional republic, and proceeds to call it a democracy. Why? Because it has the characteristic, the non-essential characteristic of free elections. The same with censorship. The package dealers say that the defining characteristic of that concept is that somebody is being kept from communicating his ideas, which applies equally to the government prohibiting your book from being published and to Facebook exercising its right to reject your post. Both are the same, the package dealer declares. Or when people are dying from drug overdoses, the package dealer says the essential fact is not that they are taking fentanyl, but they are taking opioids. Or when Robin Hood takes back stolen property, the package dealer says that the essential fact is that the property is being transferred from someone rich to someone poor. That's what a focus on non-essentials accomplishes. It does away with A by redefining it as B. So now we come to point 3. Based on what we've discussed, what do you need to do to identify a package deal and being taken in by it? Here are 5 simple steps you can take. One, the first is an obvious one. Know exactly what the term refers to. Now, certainly for any term you encounter, you should know what it refers to, but package deals are tricky. What they are actually referring to is not what they may claim to be referring to. The term democracy, for example, is allegedly about some system that features voting, such as that of ancient Athens, but in fact the term is always used in describing America, whose system you know is that of a constitutional republic. That is the actual referent. Second, once you are clear on the referent, ask yourself, are 2 dissimilar items being treated as the same? In this case, yes. A constitutional republic and a democracy, which you know are opposites, are being packaged together as one. The third step is to see whether the referent of the term is being defined by a non-essential characteristic. Here, America's system is being defined as one in which the people vote for their representatives in government, when you know that the defining characteristic of a constitutional republic, that is the characteristic that distinguishes it from all other political systems, is its commitment to the inalienability of rights. The fourth step is to determine whether the use of this term results in the elimination of a valid integration and its replacement by an invalid one. In this case, the concept of a constitutional republic is being replaced by the vague notion of a political system that is free because it has voting. Lastly, evidence of the presence of a package deal is the presence of a false alternative. If you can identify a false alternative, there's usually a package deal at work. When you see that you are being presented with a choice of either X or Y, and you know that the real alternative is Z, then you know that there is a package deal somewhere. You know that the true alternative has disappeared because it has been absorbed into some package deal. So if you are given the choice of people being ruled either by an unlimited majority vote or by some sort of dictatorship, you know that there is a package deal here. You know that the fundamental consideration in assessing political systems is the issue of freedom, and you know that both the choices you're being given represent some form of anti-freedom, which means that the true alternative, that of a constitutional republic in which individual rights are respected, that alternative has been packaged into a system in which people have a vote. So that's how you can go through steps to know whether you're being confronted with a package deal or not. And to hammer home this idea, let's see how these steps work with regard to a term that may be difficult to identify as a package deal. Let's look at the term stakeholder. What does that word supposedly mean? Well, it has a fuzzy definition. It means anyone who has some interest in the actions of a company. Here's a definition from Investopedia, quote, "A stakeholder has a vested interest in a company and can either affect or be affected by a business's operations and performance. Typical stakeholders are investors, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and governments," close quote. To repeat, typical stakeholders are investors, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and government. Let's leave aside for the moment the last two items, communities and governments. What is this term used for? It is intended, obviously, to encourage a company to pay attention to its so-called stakeholders. However, does a business really need to be told this? Does it need to be told that if it ignores the interests of its employees or customers or suppliers, it will fail? Obviously not. What then is the need for this term? In a free market, a company operates to maximize its long-term profits. It exists at root to serve the interests of one entity, the shareholders, the owners. It operates to increase the value of the company, which means to increase the value of the owner's property. That is the ultimate purpose, the ultimate end. All its other activities, including its interactions with employees, customers, and suppliers, are simply the means to that end. Now, let's say you were opposed to capitalism. You're opposed to private property. You're opposed to the profit motive. Let's say you wanted to make business operate more, quote, democratically. What might you do? Well, you might try to change the status of the shareholder. You could declare that shareholders deserve no special concern by the company, that their interests should be taken into account only because they have some stake in the functioning of the company, just as many other parties do. And all stakeholders should therefore have an equal say in the running of the company. The shareholders have no unique rights. They are merely stakeholders like all the others. So if we ask who is the target, who is the real referent of the term stakeholder, the answer is clearly the shareholder. The shareholder is now labeled a stakeholder. So that was step one. Step two, are there two dissimilar things being packaged together here? Yes, the shareholders and the other so-called stakeholders. The distinctive status and interests of the shareholder are being equated with those of the employees, and customers and suppliers. 3, is there an attempted definition by non-essentials? Sure. The shareholder is defined not as an owner, but merely as someone affected by the company's activities. The definition deliberately fails to mention the one characteristic that in fact distinguishes the shareholder from the other stakeholders' ownership. 4, is a valid integration being replaced by an invalid one? Yes. The concept of a shareholder is replaced by the invalid pseudo-concept of the stakeholder. Now, you might ask here whether the concept of shareholder is really being eliminated. After all, isn't it still in use? Isn't the shareholder explicitly named as one of the groups included in the definition of stakeholder? But here I'll remind you again of the difference between a word and a concept. The true meaning of shareholder is an owner or part owner of a corporation. And owners have the ultimate right over their property. It is ultimately, as I said, for the owner's benefit that a corporation operates. This meaning is now wiped out. The word shareholder may still be used, but the actual concept it stands for, the concept of an owner as distinguished from a non-owner, has been preempted. And as the final step to analyzing this package deal, we need to ask whether there is a false alternative here. Yes. We are told that either a company cares about the interests of all its, quote, stakeholders, cares for them equally and succeeds, or it ignores them all and fails. The true alternative of regarding the shareholders' interests as the ultimate end and the interests of the employees, etc., as only the means to that end, that is eliminated because all stakeholders are given an equal voice. Now, I won't go into how the consequences of this package deal are increased exponentially by the inclusion of communities and governments as stakeholders whose, quote, interests a company must accommodate. I think you already get the idea of this package deal's destructiveness. But to concretize that idea, here is a statement several years ago by the Business Roundtable. That's an organization of CEOs of America's major corporations. Quote, "We share a fundamental commitment to all our stakeholders. We commit to 1, delivering value to our customers, 2, investing in our employees. This starts with compensating them fairly and providing important benefits. 3, dealing fairly and ethically with our suppliers. 4, supporting the communities in which we work. We respect the people in our communities and protect the environment by embracing sustainable practices across our business. 5, generating long-term values for shareholders." This is number 5, the last after all the other 4. Continuing the statement, each of our stakeholders is essential. We commit to deliver value to all of them for the future success of our companies, our communities, and our country, close quote. Now, this statement, signed by 181 CEOs, was not deemed at all controversial. This concession to the enemies of capitalism, this notion that something other than the pursuit of profit is the proper standard for business decisions, was viewed as mere common sense, a simple, non-ideological observation that a company can't ignore the needs of its stakeholders. That is the intellectual power of a package deal. To conclude, let me say that many of the worst ideas accepted in our culture are made possible by package deals, but they survive and fester only in darkness, in deception. Once we expose them, we can clearly name the issues that they are trying to obscure. Constitutional republic versus democracy, free speech versus censorship, economic power versus political power, discrimination by ability versus discrimination by race, These issues can then be rationally discussed and explained. All we have to do is shine the light of clarity on package deals, and they will be rendered powerless. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Yaron Brook recently had a show with a debate with a socialist a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about the concept of force.
Concept of what?
Force. And the socialists were saying how when you go in a grocery store, and if someone tries to take something without paying for it and just walk out the door and you stop them, well, you're using force against them. And to me, I thought that was incredibly ridiculous, but I wasn't really sure what the problem was there. But like the way they're using the word force is like.
Well, the problem is ignorance about the simple definition of force, because force is physical action taken against someone or his property without his consent. That's a crucial part of the definition of force. So if you take the shoplifter takes something and the store owner doesn't consent to it, that's force. They try to, often the left tries to define force as being overt acts of violence. So if it's, you punch someone in the nose, that's force. But if you just take his property, or you defraud him, or you violate a contract, but that's not force. But obviously, force means acting against a person or his property without his consent. And once you have that definition in mind, it's easy to see how to apply it.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about the concept of discrimination. So you said that certain words stand for both valid and invalid concepts, like, well, most notably selfishness, which is valid, but also can be used to misintegrate Tui and Rourke. Would you say that discrimination is the same case, that there is a valid concept which is tied to this word, but there is also an invalid one?
You're asking specifically about selfishness?
Discrimination, because...
Well, discrimination as such is a valid term. The package deal comes when you fail to differentiate between certain subdivisions of that concept discrimination. So you have racial discrimination is one type of discrimination. Or let's say that's an obviously bad action. It's a wrong action. And then you have discrimination by ability, or discrimination by age when it's appropriate, or discrimination by sex when it's appropriate, which it often is. So what I was stressing is that the concept discrimination itself is not a package deal. The package deal comes in the application to certain subdivisions. So there are many legitimate terms with subdivision, and you have to, in certain contexts, differentiate one subdivision from another. You have to differentiate in the example I gave between pit bull, which is one type of dog, and the poodle, which is another type of dog. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so discrimination means treating something differently than something else.
Yes, discrimination is distinguished between one thing and another, and it's often perfectly appropriate, necessary. Your life often depends on you discriminate between food and poison. Is that bad? Well, if you didn't do that, you wouldn't be here. So the whole point of what the package dealers do is make discrimination as such something bad, because they package it together with racial discrimination rather than differentiating valid discriminations from invalid discriminations, or proper discriminations from improper discrimination.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Just to clarify, I wanted to ask, what's the difference between an anti-concept and a package deal?
Okay. What's the difference between an anti-concept and a package deal? An anti-concept is one type of a package deal. It's the most disastrous type. But there are other package deals which don't involve an anti-concept, which don't involve a concept. Like as the example I gave, the interpretation of what Robin Hood did, what his essential actions were to warrant admiration, involves a package deal. But there's no anti-concept. Robin Hood's not a concept. Charity or justice is not an anti-concept. It's just that they interpret it by packaging together two incongruous things, by failing to distinguish between taking property from the thieves and giving it back to their victims on the one hand, and taking from the rich and giving to the poor on the other hand. They package those together and they don't belong together. But it's not a concept. So anti-concept is a specific type of package deal.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm hoping you can help me understand the opioid example in particular. I understood you to be saying that every package deal involves the wiping out of an essential distinction or differentiation, and I'm having a hard time understanding what the essential differentiation is between, say, fentanyl and OxyContin. I thought maybe it was that.
Oh, no, I'll tell you what it is.
Sure.
The difference is that this epidemic of people, of thousands, tens of thousands of people dying from overdoses is because they're taking fentanyl. Yet if you say, well, it's because they're taking opioids, that includes other things which are in fact not the cause of all of these deaths. Just as the pit bulls in that community were the cause of the attacks on people, but the poodles weren't, even though they're both dogs. So you have to differentiate depending on the context. When there's a legitimate need to distinguish one thing from another, the package deal refuses to discriminate. It erases the difference. So here there's obviously a need to differentiate fentanyl from OxyContin because one is the cause of the epidemic and the other isn't.
So am I right in thinking it's not an essential characteristic of fentanyl as such,
No,
but the use in this...
No. It depends on the context. It's an essential characteristic in the context of this epidemic where people are dying. You want to know, why are people dying? Are they dying because they're taking opioids? Are they dying because they're ingesting something so that anything you ingest becomes becomes the cause of this epidemic? Obviously not. So the essential fact in explaining the cause of the deaths from overdose is that it's fentanyl, not that it's an opioid other than fentanyl.
Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask you if the word concept greed is a package deal, and if it's not a package deal, is it ever proper to use it as a positive?
Oh, sure. I think it's proper to use it as a positive if you set the context properly. You could ask the same thing about the term selfish, which is certainly a package deal. Greed is a term with... Greed is selfishness times 10. That's what people use it for. So it's bad enough that they've got the wrong concept of selfishness, but then they've got the concept of greed, which builds on that. So the important thing is when you use that, if you want to use the term greed, just as if you want to use the term selfish, you cannot just use it without explanation. You have to tell the people you're communicating with, or using this term for, what you mean by it, the context in which you're using it. So, and the same with greed. I think you can use it, you can almost always use selfishness instead of it, but if you see some particular need to stress greed, like one of the chapters in Atlas Shrugged is the utopia of greed, which is an appropriate heading, appropriate concept to use, because she wants to stress and overstress this issue of the virtue of selfishness, in effect. So if you have a legitimate context in which to use it, do so, but be sure you explain exactly what you mean by it.
Thank you very much.
Hi. I'm wondering, based on what you've said, if you think that ageism and ableism constitute improper and invalid forms of discrimination, and if employers should, in fact, be able to discriminate based on age and disability.
Yes, well, certainly they should be able to discriminate on the basis of ability, but these concepts like ageism or even sexism are anti-concepts because they pretend, they seem plausible because people say, well, there are occasions of unjust discrimination against women. There are occasions of unjust discrimination against old people. And they say, well, therefore, any discrimination against women, any discrimination against the elderly is unjustified and it's packaged together. That's the package deal. That's the anti-concept. And that's why, as I say, those kind of sexism, ageism, ableism, speciesism, those are anti-concepts and should not be used.
Do you have an example of a form of a valid discrimination in one of those cases?
Discrimination of what? Women, age of what?
Any of them.
Women, yes. Women, because they have longer life expectancies than men, should pay more for annuities than men do.
Mm.
Women, because they are largely not as strong as men, will not be as represented in professions like firefighting as men are.
Okay.
So there are many valid, the point is, it's not hard to think of valid discriminations by sex or by age. Sometimes they're not valid. There are occasions where women and men should be treated alike. So you can't discriminate and say, for example, women are stupider than men. That is an invalid discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
But where there's a valid one, then it's valid and it should be permitted. It should not be smeared by this package.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm a pediatrician, and in the field of medicine, there's an increasing push to call physicians providers. And so that screams package deal to me, but I'm just trying to figure out what exactly it's trying to obliterate. Because obviously they want to use NPs and PAs, but that seems like a good shift to use lower level practitioners, mid-level practitioners.
Well, I'm not sure what the purpose of that concept provider is. First of all, it's definitely a result of altruism. It's definitely motivated by conveying the idea that a doctor exists to provide help to other people. He's a help provider, not a doctor for help. That definitely is an element there. As to whether there's some other package deal there, it's possible. It's possible that they want to equate doctors with other providers. Nurses are providers. I don't know, chefs are providers. Dietitians are providers. So it's possible that they want to package them together. I'm not familiar with that field. You'd have to look into it.
Thank you.
Thank you.